This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Monday, June 14th. Welcome to Africa 54. We continue to work remotely because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But what hasn't changed is our commitment to bringing you the latest and most important news from the African continent and around the world. Here is today's Africa 54. The G7 summit in Britain is over, and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says the agreement from European countries at the G7 summit to enter text-based negotiations in the World Trade Organization on a waiver of COVID-19 vaccine intellectual property rights is a move in the right direction. India and South Africa, both guests at the G7 summit, are leading the proposal to waive intellectual property rights for COVID-19 vaccines at the WTO. Leaders at the summit also agreed to donate 1 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses over the next year to poorer countries, of which South Africa will be one of them. Meanwhile, the G7 leaders have also agreed to raise their contributions to meet an overdue spending pledge of $100 billion a year by rich countries to help poorer countries cut carbon emissions and cope with global warming. The group of 7 wealthiest economies are also calling for an immediate end to hostilities in Ethiopia's Tigray region. In a communique issued following the summit in Britain, the leaders say they are, quote, deeply concerned by the ongoing conflict in Ethiopia's Tigray region and reports of an unfolding major humanitarian tragedy. Additionally, the G7 nations are calling for unimpeded humanitarian access to all areas and the immediate withdrawal of Eritrean forces. Ethiopian voters are poised to go to the polls next week for elections that were delayed by COVID-19. Some voters will have to wait longer because voting is being pushed back to September in the Tigray region because of war and civilian displacement, and in parts of the Somali and Afar regions because of the territorial disputes, and in parts of Western Oromia and the Benishangul-Gumuz region because of ethnic violence. This week, Africa 54 is bringing you profiles of Ethiopians who are voting and those who are not voting as they explain what matters to them and what hopes they have for the future. You will hear from a barber in Dire Dawa, a truck driver from Ambo, a factory worker in Mekelle, and a shoeshine person in Hawassa. We begin with Bedelu Mola, an artist in Addis Ababa.
Being an Ethiopian for me means living together in harmony, a common home for all, where all nations and nationalities live equally with respect, civility, and integrity. As a nation, our everyday challenges are related to the current political instability. At a time when ethnic division is posing a risk of disintegration, regions are facing conflicts. These are threatening our internal peace. In addition, the COVID-19 pandemic is also challenging us. So, all these added together affect my professional work. It also severely affects the nation's economy, and the economic damage reduces the society's quality of life. What I don't like in my country is the ethnic conflict. Given the challenges we are facing, this should have been the time when extremists look at the country, look at the bigger picture, and sit around the table to find a solution. Instead, we are fighting and killing each other, leaving our door wide open to external enemies. So I believe we should sit and find a solution to our problems. What I think the government should do is it should bring all political parties and civic associations together, find a common solution to our common problems, and work together to find peace. That is a difficult question. I am a painter. I can't be a prime minister. But just to answer the question, I will bring all political parties that have different thinking and agenda around the table. I want to prioritize the country's survival, add on ideas that bring peace, and work on delivering the country to a better future. The quality I expect from political parties is that they refrain from fueling conflict, grievance, and care about the fate of the country. Because if they don't go along with the society, who are they going to lead tomorrow? Therefore, they should have a positive role for the country. They should care for citizens' peace and unity. I wish to see a country where we all come out of this disarray, chaos, and partisanship, where political parties come together to evaluate the country to make it competent, not only in Africa, but globally through development, economy, and health services, and a country that is sovereign, steady, and has strong unity, not only for me, but for the generations to come.
That was Ethiopian artist Bedelu Mola. Be sure to join us Tuesday for more in our series on Ethiopian voters when we hear from a shoe shiner in Hawassa. Kenyan authorities are taking steps to eradicate trachoma, an infectious disease that is leading cause of blindness in Africa. About 7 million people in central Kenya are at risk for the disease. Brenda Mulinya reports from Nairobi.
Elizabeth Partoti patiently waits for her turn to be operated on. She has walked for tens of kilometers to benefit from an outreach program that she hopes will restore her sight. Elizabeth is one of thousands of people in Kenya who have either lost or are gradually losing their sight due to trachoma.
My eyes have been bothering me because I've grown old. The eyelashes are always entering inside my eyes, causing me a lot of pain. My granddaughter's been helping, removing the eyelashes physically, using her fingers, but it's very painful.
Trachoma, an infectious disease, is caused by a bacteria that attacks the inner surfaces of the eyelids. Dr. Peter Ekwom, an eye surgeon who has been carrying out trachoma surgeries in Kajiado County, says sight loss from trachoma is preventable but irreversible if not treated in time.
Every time you blink, the eyelashes rub on the corneas, and with the time, they peel off the first layer of the cornea, and then which results to an ulcer. Now the ulcer is very painful, but at the end of the day, the ulcer will heal and leaves a scar.
That repeated scarring of the eye's cornea eventually impairs vision and often leads to irreversible blindness. About 7 million people living in 12 central Kenyan counties where trachoma is endemic because of a dry climate and the pastoral and nomadic lifestyle of the communities. About 53,000 people are currently infected with the disease. Like other counties affected by trachoma, Kenya had wanted to eliminate it by 2020, the World Health Organization's target. The target date has now been moved to 2023.
So the way forward for the Kenya Trachoma Elimination Program is to clear the remaining trachoma trichosis backlog, which stands at around 5,000 at the moment. That is 5,000 people who require urgent surgery to avert blindness in the 12 trachoma endemic counties.
But to eradicate trachoma, experts say people in areas prone to the disease must take greater precautions. Most of the communities at risk are nomadic, sometimes living in the same quarters as their livestock.
The flies breed because of the dung and the urine. And then because the flies are breeding, every time there is a discharge in a child's face, the bacteria is carried from the child to the mother.
Kenya's plans to defeat trachoma depend on donors to provide the money needed for detection, treatment, and prevention programs. Only with more contributions, Kenya says, will the country reach its goal of eliminating this terrible disease. Brenda Mulinya for VOA News, Nairobi.
A report published in the New England Journal of Medicine shows the potentially life-saving results of lab-grown mosquitoes infected with bacteria. The insects may no longer have the ability to transmit dengue. VOA's Arasha Basadi has more.
Researchers at this lab in Rio de Janeiro filter larvae from mosquitoes infected with Wolbachia bacteria. The infection may prevent transmission of viruses like dengue. Researcher Dr. Bettina Durovny explains this may just be the beginning.
The first experiments were with dengue. More recently, studies have been published showing that it also has the capacity to reduce the transmission of Zika and chikungunya. What we are doing now is transferring this knowledge of basic sciences to expand this to protect the populations. And the results that we are observing are showing a reduction.
Researchers infect and release mosquitoes into regions of countries like Australia, Brazil, Indonesia, and Vietnam. They then measure those areas against control group communities outside the regions with Wolbachia mosquitoes. Durovny explains.
We compare the areas that we treated with the areas that weren't, and these areas have been similar through time. So what we do is compare the areas that we treated with the areas that weren't. The areas that weren't treated function as a control. Our expectation is we need at least 3 years to have more consistency with the results while building this evidence.
Researchers say it's too soon to know what effects large-scale modified insects could have on the ecosystem. But for now, the results of an Indonesian study recently published in the New England Journal of Medicine show a 77% drop in the incidence of dengue, and the number of people who'd normally need hospital care from the virus fell by 86%. The studies led by scientists at the World Mosquito Program will expand to Colombia, Sri Lanka, India, and the Western Pacific. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
Concerns over the safety of the COVID-19 vaccine are common, especially when it comes to inoculating very young children. A new study suggests that some mothers may be passing along antibodies to their infants. VOA's Dilgi Timoshin has the details.
Dora is 6 months old. His mother, Nagihan Dede, was visiting her family in Turkey when she found out she was pregnant with her son. Then the coronavirus pandemic broke out and she was stranded in Istanbul for months.
We never got out. I just went to see my doctors because we didn't know what the disease was.
She returned to the U.S. and in October, 5 months after returning from Turkey, Dora was born. Within weeks, the U.S. began its vaccine campaign and Dede, who was breastfeeding, began looking into whether the vaccines were safe for her and her child.
I consulted my doctor, and my doctor told me that I also passed the vaccine benefits to my child through breastfeeding, and that it was protecting him as well.
A joint study by Harvard University and Massachusetts General Hospital suggests mothers are passing on COVID-19 antibodies to their babies. The study included 131 women, 84 of them pregnant, 31 breastfeeding, and 16 neither pregnant nor breastfeeding. The research found that vaccine antibodies passed on to the babies before and after birth through the umbilical cord or breast milk.
Individuals that has been vaccinated and they are breastfeeding, they provide a more robust immune protective response to the infant versus if you've been naturally infected with COVID-19.
Dr. Sira Madad is an infectious diseases expert featured on a Netflix documentary called Pandemic: How to Prevent an Outbreak. She is also a breastfeeding mother.
While I was breastfeeding my now 1-year-old, I actually decided months ago that I would pump and give the breast milk to my 5- and 7-year-old in their milk, just to pass on those antibodies and that protective benefits.
Some parents worry that the breast milk of a vaccinated mother can be harmful to the baby. But according to the CDC, these vaccines are not believed to be a risk to lactating people or their breastfeeding babies. And the U.S. Health Agency says Reports show antibodies in the breast milk may help protect babies, although more data is needed to determine what protections these antibodies may provide.
So you're not going to find the virus in the breast milk. You're going to find the antibodies, the protective antibodies instead. And so it's important just to understand how the mechanism and the biological plausibility of any dangers pose, and there is no dangers pose in that regard. And
doctors hope this is good news for mothers like Nagihan Dede, who want to ensure they and their children are protected from the virus. Dilge Timochin, VOA News, Washington.
We would like to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. Our address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, Nigeria's Nollywood producers hailed the arrival of Netflix in Africa. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54. As we mentioned, the G7 summit ended Sunday, but not before nations committed to a series of actions to end the coronavirus pandemic, mitigate climate change, and rebuild the global economy. The group named China and Russia as sources of global insecurity and economic threats. White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara reports from Brussels on the next leg of U.S. President Joe Biden's European tour.
An air show by the British Red Arrows, and a reception with Queen Elizabeth. G7 summit host British Prime Minister Boris Johnson pulled out all the stops to facilitate this meeting with leaders of the world's 7 wealthiest democracies, their first in person since 2019.
There has been a fantastic degree of harmony.
Despite the appearance of normality, the coronavirus pandemic overshadowed the summit, which ended with a pledge to end the outbreak and work to prevent similar ones in the future.
Leaders have pledged over 1 billion doses, either directly or through funding to COVAX.
Activists say it's not enough. They demand that rich countries, which are accused of hoarding vaccines, do more, including waiving intellectual property rights for vaccines at the World Trade Organization. U.S. President Joe Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron support the waiver, but the rest of the G7 opposes it.
We know that donations are not going to get us out of this crisis. What we needed to see was the G7 leaders coming together and to commit to lift the patents on these vaccines and share the recipes so that developing countries can make these vaccines for themselves.
China, which is not a G7 member, was a focus of the talks. President Biden pushed leaders to call out Beijing's forced labor practices and unwillingness to play by international trade rules. The group announced a U.S.-sponsored infrastructure financing mechanism for low- and middle-income countries called Build Back Better World to rival China's Belt and Road Initiative, the global infrastructure strategy central to Beijing's foreign policy.
We think that there's a much more equitable way to provide for the needs of countries around the world, and so it's a values-driven, high-standard, transparent financing mechanism we're going to provide.
China hit back by saying that the days when global decisions were dictated by a small group of countries are long gone. Russia, kicked out of the G8 in 2014 following Moscow's annexation of Crimea, was also called out for its destabilizing behavior, including cyber attacks and chemical weapons use against individuals opposed to Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Autocrats have enormous power. They don't have to answer to a public.
On climate change, leaders committed to meet an overdue spending pledge of $100 billion a year to help developing countries cope with global warming. Despite activist pressure, only two nations, Canada and Germany, gave specific cash amounts.
They are basically painting a story like they're doing what needs to be done for the climate and ecological emergency. But we know that they're not.
After an audience with the Queen Sunday evening, Biden flew to Brussels to attend summits with NATO and the European Union. From Brussels, Patsy Dakuswara, VOA News.
Reports of anti-Asian violence across the U.S. have filled headlines recently, but anti-Asian sentiments is also surfacing online. VOA's Tina Trin reports.
An increasing number of violent attacks against Asians in the U.S. have come to light, but the abuse is also happening online. 17% of Asian Americans reported experiencing severe online harassment, according to a January survey conducted by the Anti-Defamation League, a jump from 11% the previous year.
When it comes to online harassment, 75% of Asian adults who experienced harassment said it was due to their race and ethnicity, and that's actually a slightly higher share than Black and Hispanic adults who also experienced online harassment.
Sei Chung is editor-in-chief at Morning Consult, an online polling firm. The company surveyed 1,000 Asian adults in March and found that 29% had experienced online harassment, with 58% of incidents happening on social media. Chung says the impact of the harassment may be worse than what's been reported.
So a lot of Asians, because they don't talk about mental health issues openly, suffer in silence. And what our data shows is that they're not alone.
The online environment is our environment now, and that affects people. And if it's being said online, it needs to be taken seriously as it would offline.
University of California professor Yulin Xuan has studied the proliferation of anti-Asian hashtags on Twitter.
Hashtags are really, the new type of graffiti on the wall. It's a way to identify yourself to a particular group. It's a way to find people with similar ideologies.
Xuan and her fellow researchers analyzed more than 700,000 Chinese virus hashtags in March of 2020 and found that half were combined with anti-Asian hashtags.
It creates this really racist belief against these people and has real-world consequences.
It's harder to determine whether a cause and effect relationship exists between online sentiment and real-world violence, but Xuan says it's worth investigating.
At some point, we need to see that these correlations and these signals are so large that they can't be ignored anymore.
While online hate speech is contagious, the opposite is true too, says Georgia Tech professor Srijan Kumar.
If we can start spreading counter-speech messages, if we can support, encourage, and express solidarity towards and defend Asian entities, then that essentially creates a cascade effect.
Kumar says exposure to counter-speech can potentially discourage users from turning hateful. In the fight against online hate, these experts say it's about the power of words. Tina Trin, VOA News.
Once considered low-end cinema produced in a hurry to turn a hypothetical profit, the Nigerian film industry is now one of the most prolific entertainment industries in the world. Most African films available on streaming platforms like Netflix come from Nigeria or South Africa. Even though streaming services such as Iroko or Showmax existed before, for Nollywood producers, the arrival of Netflix in Africa is expected to revolutionize the industry. Here's VOA's Azuma Compaore.
They want your dad to turn it down.
Whether she produced or acted in it, you have probably seen her name attached to well over 30 movies streaming on Netflix. Nollywood superstar Omoni Oboli, like many other African filmmakers, have been involved with production from the continent that have acquired worldwide exposure thanks to the streaming service giant. She says getting your movie on Netflix is a game changer.
People were watching our movies all over the world, but most of it was piracy. Now our movies are available to the whole world, and they're available legally and financially beneficial to us. So I would say Netflix has come to open a different world to our movies. Not everyone is going to go to FESPAC, or not everyone is going to go to Qatar. Not everyone is going to go to all those film festivals. But now, from the comfort of their homes, they now have access to you and your projects. So now they can reach out to you. Now they can say, you know what? I've seen this project. I like it. I want to do a remake of this project in my own country. I want to do a co-production deal with you on a sequel for this project, right? So before Netflix, we didn't have that.
Netflix coming into Africa, it's like a dream come true for us, because now we know that we have a platform that can take our films, no matter if we shoot in, it doesn't matter if we shoot in Africa, or we shoot in the US, or we shoot in Canada or Australia. We have a platform that can take our films to the global market.
Pascal Atuma is also a Nollywood veteran with numerous films under his belt. His latest one, Clash, was released last month on Netflix and talks about the journey of a young Nigerian Canadian looking for his biological father, only to find himself entangled between love and the reality of a multicultural society. Atuma says the movie is an exploration of the shock between cultures, something Omoni Oboli, who acts in it, says she has experienced firsthand.
I live in Canada and Nigeria, right? I see the clash of both cultures. My kids had to move from Nigeria to Canada, right? So I see that there is a whole world of difference. Their friends come into the house. I see the difference. As an African mom, I have to always tell myself, okay, it's different here. The kids are different. They behave differently. So you're from one extreme and the other people are from the other extreme. How do you balance this?
What are you doing here?
They're just kids. They're just hanging out.
Hanging out. They're just hanging out in the bedroom with
Relax.
Atuma says the shooting clash in Nigeria and Canada was a strategic move.
Calm down now.
So we wanted to show the Canadian government, in particular, that a movie led by Nigerian, directed by Nigerian, Canadian, produced by Nigerian, by the head producer, and produced with some Canadians, that we can combine to make progressive projects that can go global.
For many years, the Nigerian film industry has been among the world's top 3 film industries in terms of volume, next to the United States and India. And now, Netflix is giving it a new boost by commissioning more original content and becoming the dream deal for many producers. But what Oboli wants above all is to see more female directors and producers in Nollywood being recognized for their work with no criticism.
People would criticize what they can't understand. You're this little woman who's supposed to be in a little corner doing little things, and you're trying to do big things. So they're going to criticize it. It's okay. I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm not looking to them for validation. I know who I am. I know what I bring to the table. I have a seat at the table, and no one is going to take it away from me.
With Netflix now looking to diversify its programming by adding more original content, Pascal Atuma says African producers are ready. They have the languages, the cultures, and most importantly, an international audience that has yet to discover all the African stories that will soon populate the small screens.
Is this how you're going to be? Coming here to mess everything up?
Come on, get to be his dog. Bring everything short.
That was VOA's Azuma Compaore reporting. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, we thank you for watching.